Great. So, hi everyone, good morning. I'm very happy to be with you today to really celebrate the Krembil Centre for Neuroinformatics 1-year anniversary. It's been, as you can imagine, a very exciting and a very busy year. As Sean said, my name is David Rotenberg, and I'm the Operations Director of the Krembil Centre. And I'll be providing both an overview of the Centre and a deeper dive into our approach to building systems for data management. I'm joined today by Hennessy, our medical imaging data engineer, and Adeel Ansari, our knowledge engineering lead, who will both be presenting later in the talk. First, I'd like to start with the core thesis that mental health is health. This concept is fundamental to CAMH's vision. The brain is the seat of our emotions, experiences, and the ultimate determinant of quality of life. And we further believe in identifying the foundational underlying biological causes of mental illness towards furthering our understanding, designing treatments, and reducing stigma. And we know that this is no small task. The brain is a complex hierarchy of interrelated systems, from genes to cells, to circuits, to the whole brain, to how the patient ultimately presents in the clinic. And we further know that the symptoms of the disorders that we treat overlap considerably, making disentangling these relationships even more challenging. To lead this charge, the Centre is home to a team of world-class scientists who work together to bridge the scales from brain to behavior. As Dr. Sybil described in his keynote, and as you'll see in their presentations, this team is leveraging their diverse experience across domains towards greater understanding and identification of mechanisms. Towards these aims, we're heavily engaged in multiscale modeling and are accelerating the application of artificial intelligence to each of these scales independently, as well as across for broader investigations. And so our shared challenge from the data perspective is how to collect and manage a wealth of heterogeneous and complex data across multiple scales, as well as across time. We also need to provide the computational infrastructure and tools to explore and interrogate these data and to support our cross-disciplinary teams to interrogate data, model these complex processes, and apply advanced analytics. We're also acutely aware of the opportunity and the duty of being part of the largest mental health hospital in Canada. As Dr. Joanna Yu will further discuss in the development of the Brain Health Data Bank, we are committed to supporting a learning healthcare model. This includes the collection of high-quality clinical data that is engineered into a central knowledge graph, and we'll talk about that a bit later, that can be utilized to support clinicians and power decision support dashboards. These clinical data can also be used both independently and in combination to further discovery and help create new knowledge that can be embedded back into our knowledge graph. These mutually reinforcing cycles help further our goal of integration, innovation, and importantly, translation towards building the first learning healthcare model for mental health. The initial foundation of our data management approach is the Neuroinformatics platform, which was developed in collaboration with the Ontario Brain Institute. The strategy was to build a centralized research data management platform to coordinate and integrate rich multimodal research and clinical data. Our instance includes specialized databases for different data types, including XNAT for medical imaging, which you'll hear about a little bit later, LabKey for genetics, and REDCap for assessment data that are all federated together under Big Data Hadoop. Since its implementation, the platform has been significantly customized for CAMH and expanded to enhance its functionality. A major component of this enhancement is the implementation of the knowledge graph, which, through open, interoperable schemas, allow us to integrate diverse data types and do so across the disorders that we treat at CAMH. The knowledge graph is powered by Nexus, originally designed for the Blue Brain project, and has proven highly effective and highly scalable for complex datasets. It's further designed from the ground up to embrace the FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data principles. These principles form the foundation of modern scientific data management. In our implementation, we actually have two knowledge graphs. One clinical instance that is used to combine data from Cerner, our electronic medical record system, as well as clinical REDCap, into a single interoperable format under the FHIR schema. This data model is internationally recognized and adopted by the Ontario Digital Health Strategy and the National Institutes for Health. This flexible knowledge graph can be used for dynamic applications, including interactive decision dashboards for clinicians. On the other side, we have our research instance that is being used to harmonize our research records and stage them for computation, including artificial intelligence. This unique approach allows us to securely federate data when needed, such as accessing anonymized medical records to support research questions, and the return of data to the clinical side, such as in the case of pharmacogenetics in personalized medicine. We're also able to leverage this federation approach to interact with a broader network. Instances of Nexus are already used in the Human Brain Project, and we recently launched a public instance with Compute Canada. Further, we're engaged with the teams at the Canadian Open Neuroscience Platform and the Ontario Brain Institute to build instances of Nexus that through interoperable schemas will allow us to work across a broad data network. Data can be made discoverable and given appropriate permissions combined. By doing so, we want to help enrich CAMH's capacity to integrate with the wider neuroscience community towards accelerated discovery. And with that, I'm pleased to hand the presentation to Jay Hennessy, who will speak in more detail about our medical imaging data strategy.
Thanks, David. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So my name is Jay Hennessy. As David said, I'm a medical imaging data engineer at KCNI, and I'll talk a bit about our Neuroinformatics platform and specifically XNet, giving a bit of an update on the status, some developments we've made so far, and where we plan to go from here. So XNet is our web tool that we support for CAMH researchers to store and manage their neuroimaging data. And originally, it was developed as an open source tool for mainly MR images and a DICOM file type. And some of the advantages that it offers are really easy to use access management to your data, some built-in features for creating pipelines and quality control scripts. So it's extensible and also has a good user community that we can both learn from and contribute to. So here's an overview of what our Neuroinformatics platform looks like from an outside view. And really it allows researchers to gather their data as seen with the icons on the left of different modalities. So genetic data with LabKey, or here we're talking about imaging data with XNet, and also form data. And all of that data moves through our system and gets federated in a large database that's multimodalic. And researchers can access their data through one of the web platforms for their imaging type, or they can choose to create dashboards or run further analysis through the federated database system and view those analyses and dashboards through tools like Spotfire or Tableau. So a quick update on the status of our system. So currently we have 43 projects hosted on our system, which equates to 6,800 subjects and counting across 13 sites, currently the majority of which are CAMH, but there are some collaborating sites at the moment, and those are always increasing. And specifically looking at XNet, we have just over 2,000 MRI sessions, which correlates to 27,000 individual scans, as well as about 1,300 EEG sessions or 6,800 EEG scans. And there's also a little bit of PET data, about 200 or so sessions. So some of the developments we've had so far, I'll highlight one here, is the EEG extension. So the original XNet was created primarily for MR images and the DICOM format. And we had a system where MR data was automatically pulled from the MRI unit at CAMH into the XNet system. And from there, we could use the pipeline engine to run some quality control or pre-processing, and it would get that information would get federated, and users could view all of that information in a project dashboard to get an overview of what was happening with their project, or some kind of quality control page to monitor the quality of their data. And what we wanted to do was mimic these features, but with EEG data, so that researchers who are doing EEG research can also take advantage of this platform. So currently, EEG data can be acquired and stored on the CAMH file storage system, and from there we can automatically upload it to XNet while we extract important metadata and render images to give the user experience on XNet a seamless user experience across modalities. Once the data is in XNet, the EEG data can also be now run through our pipeline engine to create quality control metrics, and we have a standard pre-processing pipeline to give it a minimally pre-processed data that researchers can use. And this runs on our supercomputing cluster at CAMH and can easily be configured with Redcat. And so once we have that new data, it gets pushed back into XNet and into the federated system using a tool called NiFi, which is useful for big data ETL and viewing your processing pipelines as you create them. And then finally, now the EEG data can also be viewed in your dashboards, as well as the quality control metrics. So looking forward, as David mentioned, and Adeel will talk about following this talk, we really want to integrate with Nexus to be able to have our data represented in a way that's fair, so findable, interoperable, accessible, and reproducible. And to do that for neuroimaging data, we have to have our data in a way that's uploadable to the Blue Brain Nexus instance. And to do that, we use the neuroimaging data model. And what the NIDM does is it allows us to represent this data in a way that Nexus can understand. And the way it does is breaking it up into 3 parts. So we have the neuroimaging data model experiment, which allows us to represent our raw data coming from XNet or after it's been bits converted. So that process is already started. And next we have the neuroimaging data model workflow. So in this case, really what we want to be able to do is recreate any analysis pipeline that we have so that we can have reproducible science across our system. It's really important to track the provenance of what tools were used to run analyses, what parameters those tools used, what scripts were used, what systems they were run on. And once you have all this information, along with the information of what your raw data looks like, you can share this information, and any group or collaborators can reproduce your same results. So once you have your provenance data stored in the NIDM workflow, it's also important to have some representation of your results that are findable. Rather than having your neuroimaging analysis results printed to some Excel spreadsheet on your local system, you can make your results findable to create robust meta-analysis by storing them in a standard format like NIDM and sharing them through Nexus. So that's some of the exciting stuff we have coming through our pipeline. And with that, I'll pass it on to Adeel.
Thanks, Jay. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Adeel, and I'm responsible for implementing the knowledge graph at KCNS. So to start, I'll briefly introduce us to what the knowledge graph is and why we are creating one. So on the next slide, you can see that knowledge graphs are built on graph database technology. The primary feature of knowledge graphs are that they are able to integrate data from many different types of sources and many different types of systems. And that allows us to create a full representation of important entities, which in this case would be our patients. And also because it's built on graph database technology, exploring the relationships in the data becomes very efficient in terms of speed and in terms of the ability to write queries that explore that data. Secondly, you can see when the data is loaded into the knowledge graph, it's enriched with additional semantic metadata, which tells us more about the nature of these entities and also the relationship between these entities. We are able to link the provenance information as well as the data quality information, and that helps the user understand if the data is suitable for their needs, and also helps them understand where that data came from, what transformations maybe that data went through to end up in its final format. And finally, the process of creating the knowledge graph is very collaborative and inclusive. So maybe as opposed to typical data models, the vocabulary that is used to describe concepts and entities is the same vocabulary that is used to actually physically store the data. Therefore, everyone involved in the creation of the knowledge graph or the usage of the knowledge graph is able to communicate with each other using the same vocabulary and terminology, and it makes it much more intuitive when trying to explore the data in the knowledge graph. So on the next slide, what we see is a high-level overview of how we're getting the information to our end users, which are the clinical teams, the research teams, or external teams. So our goal being that we want to support the research and clinical teams to have personalized care, and in the creation of personalized brain health models, we of course need the variety of patient information that exists in our system. So at CAMH, those systems include our EHR system, which is iCare, XNAT, as Jay described, which contains a lot of the imaging data, and also LabKey, and we have a few other systems also. So we're also pulling data from external systems, which I'll describe near the end of the presentation. So that data is all integrated and distributed through one of the knowledge graph instances, either clinical, research, or public. And depending on the requirements, the data can be shared across these instances, and we can anonymize or de-anonymize as required. Finally, once the information is in Nexus, it can be accessed through one of the tools that the user is comfortable with, such as dashboard and reporting tools, or data science platforms, or just query tools that allow us to query using graph traversal languages or Elasticsearch. So the next slide, it describes the first step in the integration process, which is simply categorizing the data from our source systems into the different subject areas of information that we're receiving. So our internal systems, especially if we look at eye care, it contains a lot of the patient information, like their demographics, encounter information, medication, appointments. And then from XNAT, we get the imaging data. And from LabKey, we have the epigenetics, genetics, and genotyping information, and a few other categories. So on the next slide, what we see is once we have identified the subject areas, we need to map that data into the target ontology. So we've really tried to select ontologies that are prominent and that they cover the breadth and depth of information that we want to load. So, for example, for the patient demographics and encounter and a lot of the EHR data, we're able to use the HL7 FHIR ontology. For the imaging data, as Jay mentioned, we use NIDM, or the neuroimaging data model. The provenance and data quality data is we are able to use the W3C standard ontology. And for LabKey, we're considering using FHIR and maybe a combination of different ontologies to cover, the full breadth of data that we get from LabKey. On the next slide, we're working on a few different initiatives for our different knowledge graph instances. So as Jay mentioned earlier, for the research instance, we're working on loading the XNAT information. We've already loaded a lot of the data from REDCap, and we want to be able to link that data from REDCap with the imaging information. For the public instance, we're working with the Canadian Open Neuroscience Platform team to load the DATS information. So DATS, it's a model that allows us to inform researchers about restrictions on data access and data reuse. And we're also planning on loading COVID data sets as well as synthetic patient information data sets for training and learning purposes to help promote the usage, I guess, of knowledge graphs and help users get comfortable with the information in knowledge graphs. Finally, in the clinical instance, we're working with one of the clinical care pathway teams to construct patient trajectories using data from REDCap and iCare. So the data is pulled into the knowledge graph and it's transformed, and then it will be accessed by the clinical team through our dashboard and reporting tools. So, of course, even though the data is physically separated in these different instances, the learning and the data can be shared to, the extent that we would like, and across these instances. And we're really building these three instances all together. So with that, I'll pass it back to David. Thanks.
Thanks, Adeel. Thank you, Jay, so much. Thanks, everyone, for your attention. I hope that you got to hear a bit more about what we're doing. I think I'll stop sharing and it's open up to questions. So I actually can't see any questions. Sean, do you see any on your phone?
Sorry. Yes, there's actually two questions. So actually, there's multiple ones.
Okay.
Hold on, let me just try to scroll through here. Okay. So the first question is all MR data automatically uploaded to XNAP?
That's a great question. So it is possible to upload the data automatically, but we do this based on an elective process. So if researchers would like to have their data in the system, they can do so. And then it's a very simple change for us to do that. It doesn't require much input from their side, and then the data flow is fully automated.
Great. The next question is what are some ongoing challenges you face with creating this data infrastructure?
There's a few. I mean, I think what Adeel had shown there in the final graph is a really important piece about how to choose the ontologies that are most effective. There's a few grounding purposes or principles, one being something that is open, something that can be contributed to from the community, and foremost is interoperable. Selecting those has been a challenge, but we were quite lucky with FHIR being such an internationally recognized format that is also very extensible for these purposes.
So there is a question on what are the opportunities with FHIR? What does it allow you to do?
That's a good question. Maybe Adeel, do you want to answer that question?
Sure. So I think the standard FHIR ontology, if we look at it, it covers, it's already able to cover a lot of the subject areas that we want to be able to represent within the knowledge graph. We're also able to extend the FHIR model to maybe support localized needs specific to Canada or Ontario or within CAMH itself, and be able to publish those modifications to an online repository so that we can share that information and be able to share the data in a way that is understandable by its users. And then I think the nature of the way that these ontologies are constructed is that we're able to connect different entities from one ontology with another. So something like FHIR, it has components for imaging, but an IDM, on the other hand, is much more, I guess, in-depth. So we're able to, naturally traverse from the FHIR model to imaging information so that we really can describe all these models and use the data from these different models in an intuitive and integrated way.
Great. And then the last question actually starts with a comment, great talk by the team. And then it says, is the NIDM going to be fully automated?
Yes, it will be. So we have the pipelines that, and I can leave it to Jay, but we do have a way to fully automate the generation of the neuroimaging data model from the data in XNet and ingestion into Nexus.
Great. Well, thank you, David, Jay, Adeel, for all of this effort and your presentation. And now we'll switch over